And of course, thank Export TT for putting this on, as well as continuing in the vein of the first Fit for Europe project.
Just so we're clear.
To the beat, check it out.
I feel like I don't have that much of a commanding voice.
I was gonna say, they don't
We came to save you.
Nana, please, take them home.
Dad.
Littlefoot.
Ready? Set! Guys, I'm so sorry.
Okay, so I just gave you an idea. I mean, I guess you sort of get the idea. We are a digital animation studio, local based in Trinidad and Tobago, but now we are, in the digital space. We now, I wouldn't want to say we're a global company, but we've sort of broadened our horizons in terms of how we produce work. We're independently owned, and I would like to think we still are a regional pioneer in the industry. And we have, over the years, have done work, I think now in maybe 18 countries across the world. And again, it's all digital animation. And we do across the spectrum of animation, including 2D, 3D, storyboards, both for narrative and explainer videos. And so you would have seen some of the work we would have done for broadcast studios abroad, but we also do commercial work and explainers and that sort of thing, ebooks and whatnot. I mean, we've been here now, 13 years in the industry. We keep a base team of 9 who've been with us from the start. But when you get into the designers and animators, we are now over 40. And these numbers have since been updated. I think of 1,500 minutes produced, 20 countries. Just to give you a sense of the animation industry, what it looks like, it starts with story, it ends at distribution. It is involving a lot of parts. The thing about being a company that operates in the digital economy is that we, as a small studio, can contribute to each of these parts from what would otherwise be considered a remote location. So really, it is what you would say, in many ways, a manufacturing process. Is the creative side that the viewer or the consumer experiences, but also we have very production related and very manufacturing like elements, and we would participate in those for the pipeline for different projects as we would need. We have basically 2 different types of work streams. The work stream for outsourced production, broadcast TV that you would see on some of the networks that were mentioned before, Disney, Nickelodeon, HBO, etc. And for these shows are usually executed by huge teams over a few countries. And we have participated in either doing the animation, the rigging, the storyboarding, or some of the creative aspects of it. The other business stream that we have is visualizing scripted content, public service messages, social messages for clients who are not necessarily broadcasters, but have narrative or social messages, public service messages that they want to express in a digital format that live action video either makes difficult or impossible. So that is another main business stream for us. Sometimes those are done as a series of short videos, or it could be one longer video. And the third area is, of course, original content and co-productions that was mentioned before. And this is original content that either we initiate here or initiated by co-producing partners. And the idea for these products is to develop it and eventually sell and broadcast to markets that may have appetite for that content. These are some of the examples of the ones initiated on our side, but I will sort of get into a little more. There have been others initiated in overseas markets where they ask us to partner and co-produce it. And yeah, that is the third business stream. Just to give you an idea as to how we live in full circle, about half of the work that we do are for TV shows abroad. So that really drives the sustainability of the studio. And about 22 to 25% now is really those sort of public service announcement, explainer videos, messages that people want to do that. So those would the 75% would make up the first two areas that I spoke about. And then there are a plethora of other commercial projects that we engage in, as you would see, advertising, education, illustration, presentations, and etc. But those usually account for less of the income of the company. So from this, just to give you, since we're in context of export, really all of the TV series are initiated abroad. So that, for example, is the export, is at the very minimal, the export revenue that we earned. However, part of that 22% usually is initiated abroad, particularly within the region. We haven't gotten a lot of work extra-regional there. So usually the export income of the company from year to year varies between 50% and 75% in the last 10 years. On the broader, before we get into the details of FIT4Europe, on the broader aspects of trade in Europe, not just for our company, but for our industry, there's certain, there's catalysts to trade, and that includes the incentives that exist locally, the multilateral incentives beyond just Trinidad. We also have the markets like Annecy, big festivals within Europe, specific to a gear towards animation, and not to be understated is the European Partnership Agreement, which has a provision for culture. A lot of people don't know it, but it is the first agreement, is the first, if you want to call it, economic partnership agreement that takes culture into consideration following the Geneva Convention or in accordance with the Geneva Convention. So that is a sort of an opportunity for creatives and people in the cultural industry to latch on to. And that really is about cultural cooperation between regions, between here and within Europe. There are, however, some challenges. Of course, always will be the details, the final details of administering, whether it be incentive mechanisms or general administrative mechanism, legal and administrative mechanisms. I'm sure as small businesses among us, all of you all have had experience with navigating that. And that is a challenge across the board, because sometimes these are areas that us as creative industry companies or small business in general are just not familiar with. And sometimes we need a lot of support to really understand it and see the best way that we can benefit and exploit it. And well, I mean, there are agencies like Export TT, TTCSI, and others that are there to do that. Financial transaction infrastructure and the modeling in the Caribbean, as some people know, is still difficult. And that obviously has an impact on how, things like foreign exchange, things like digital transactions, sending payments, receiving payments continue to be a challenge for us. Again, but with the support of lobbying and the agencies that we engage with and forums like this, the idea is to bring more awareness for it, to push change. And of course, digital borders, not many people are aware, but for companies that operate in the digital economy, especially as it relates to entertainment and the audiovisual, there are now, I would say over the last three years, Europe in particular has administered digital borders. Before, what you found is a lot of the trade provisions that were originally conceptualized for the trade of goods and to some extent adapted for the trade of services, were able to manage the relationships to ensure that they comply with the trade provisions. However, with the advent of the digital transactions, digital services and productions, for a while it was very difficult for the agencies to really be able to administer those in line with the trade provisions. However, they have done their work, and now there are these digital borders that a lot of people may not be aware that they exist. So, for example, if I'm a music artist in Trinidad and I put my music out there on YouTube, 10 years ago, there would be nothing that would restrict my music and my music videos to be viewed in Europe. And as you know, you could even, within the controls of whether it be Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you could even target the markets that you believe your music or your content is made for or geared towards. However, now in the last 3 years, within the European region, I know, but I don't know other areas as well, but they have effected the systems in place to be able to put controls on that. So whereas 10 years ago, you may find my music video within the European Union may have received 10,000 views in a month, now you would see that that number significantly reduced because they would put in the algorithms, systems to that comply with whatever trade provisions are in place. So that's important to know, and of course that is why it is important to ensure that producers for that type of content ensure that on the digital side it matches what the trade agreements have in place. So for us here, it isn't quite there yet, so there still are restrictions. People may not be aware, but for audiovisual sector, Europe is a closed economy, so you cannot. But by closed, what I mean is they are geared towards the production and consumption of domestic, meaning made within the EU content, and then they have quotas for international content. So that currently, that for a long time existed within broadcast, and now it exists within digital. So again, it makes things like the European Partnership Agreement all the more important because these things have provisions that allow, under certain conditions, co-production to be considered European work. So we may do one of these shows here, and if we put it on YouTube, it may not gain the access and views as that we would want it to. However, if we make that same production within the ambit of one of the co-production as part of the cultural protocol in the economic partnership agreement, then it will get the access because it's considered European work. So those are the things that are important to know. Through the process, initiated through FIT4Europe 1 and then continuing by our creation over the years, this is just sort of to give you a landscape of both our export and our European relationships. We started with zero. I'm always grateful for, I always say that I'm grateful for the FIT4Europe project. We really started with zero before we had the last one, before we were involved in the first one. We did one project with a studio in England, and it was a small job and it didn't go well. After FIT4Europe, as you can see here on the right side, we now maintain relationships with at least 9, and of course we have a broader network. And that has, given how in this case, the animation industry works, studios from different regions produce a bigger network. So of course, working with these studios in Europe, it allows us access to bigger broadcast networks like HBO, Netflix. So for example, when we work with Submarine in Holland, who we met through FIT4Europe, we now do content that is broadcasted on Netflix and HBO. So that is if you want to call it, the web of the digital space and how we have been producing and getting access to big networks through our relationship with European partners. And here from this list, and a key submarine. We met. These are our best relationships now. That's why I put the Dutch on top. But we met them as part of the Fit for Europe one, and now they are our main partners. Submarine has grown in the same time with us. They have grown to be one of the largest production studios in for animation in Europe. They have done a lot of award-winning stuff on HBO, Netflix. The growth has been massive. They just got bought out, not bought out, but bought out by Media One Broadcast in France, 50%. And it's a relationship we keep maintaining. So with us, of course, that uplift for them benefits us indirectly because we continue to work with them and we're working with them right now. Immediately after Fit for Europe, Danraj mentioned it indirectly, but we got a project from those relationships from Virgin Animation, and of course that sort of opened relationships with studios in Spain. Similarly, Zodiac, that project came out of Fit for Europe, and then again we've sort of broadened our sort of outreach in France. And these aren't all that we work with now, but these are the ones that have brought us significant financial benefit. A bit of our experience in how the Fit for Europe one which focused on the Netherlands, France, and at that time the UK, which was, I think, either just on the edge of Brexit or just after Brexit. It was still included. It had two important components that I thought it would be good to mention. Of course, the first would be the briefing sessions. They had specific, and no doubt this will be done for the new group, but it was coming out of what stuck with me. I just took these notes. There was market-specific business culture sessions that was invaluable. Hannah mentioned some of those aspects. She touched on it. I know she will probably go into it further later. But Europe is very, very diverse in terms of its culture, and not just nationally, but regionally as well within the country. And some of the sessions that we had with Export TT sort of made us aware of that, so that we could communicate and interact and initiate discussions in an authentic way and a sensitive way, both in terms of culture and business, and some of those Hannah would have mentioned. So I found considerable value in that, and of course, had I not paid attention to it, there would have been considerable missteps. The export plan, I mean, for those of you who have been involved with export, have good relationships with Export TT over the years, they're always ponging in your head about this export plan, and I always, with hesitation approach it, because, we look at these things, right, as work that's not our work, but it was invaluable as a precursor to this meeting, not for the purpose of presenting it to anybody, but to help structure in your own mind a sort of goal-driven purpose, both in this mission and beyond. And the third thing that I thought was important is the preparation of market-specific company profiles, one-pagers, etc. That was useful, that would be part of the pre-market discussion. And I will sort of touch on some of that in a little bit. Comms and prep for me was very important coming out of those sessions. Export TT's team, MSI, as well as myself, did a lot of market scanning. I mean, I combed my network for possible referrals to make the mission, to maximize the potential of the mission. So you would find that you would have that direction from MSI and Export TT out of the work they have done, but then from that as a platform for you to now go in detail in those markets and research companies and partners that you may find might be specific to you. With all the work that is done by the consultant and the staff at Export TT, as much as it was, the truth is 80% of the work still falls on you to really curate prep in a way that you think will maximize your benefit. I don't think it's something that, I mean, you can leave it to the good folks at the consultancy and export TT, but the truth is for you to really get the benefit out of it, it has to come from you. They provide very, very good stepping stones and reference points, but really a lot of the curation before getting there. So, you know, we went in, we spent considerable time identifying commonalities, not necessarily with companies, but with regions, with markets, with products. And of course, initiating contact on our own, you know, in a soft way over months, you know what I mean? So, you know what I mean? How are you doing? You know, just really getting it, not, you know, the month before the mission, slapping in, you know, your whole CV and profile and just overwhelming people with a hard sale. For us, it was a really soft and long, well, you know, when I say long, maybe like 6 months of, you know, very soft communication and so that we could really get meaningful meetings. And the thing with those is when you start with a big list with that approach, there will be naturally this funnel and the more meaningful relationships, you know, you would find, you would have a sense of it and before you get there. And then, of course, from that, you set your meeting agenda and you curate your presentations. My presentations are never generic, but always specific to who I meet with. And, you know, presentation is a fancy word for it. Yes, a lot of times it's a conversation. I don't assume, well, I don't do it, but I don't think anybody should assume the conditions in which they would be presented. When you meet with somebody, you should not, I don't think, assume their mental state or their attention at the time. So I think presentations have to be resilient in that regard, so that regardless of the circumstances in which the presentation or discussion may be, you have the best opportunity to not so much present your products and services, but really make a meaningful connection. I don't think the meetings that come out of this are really about presenting so much or selling the products. I think that comes after, but it is really making a meaningful connection. And then from that meaningful connection, I think that's where the opportunities come. That's my experience. So before, as I mentioned, FIT4Europe 1, we had that one UK relationship. Now, you know, I showed you these 9. But right now it is, I mean, we are, well, COVID changed everything, but now it makes up 80% of our export business. And that 80% is conservative. I'm being modest out of respect for the other relationships that we have that are export relationships. But our European relationships took us through COVID. Our export relationships took us through COVID, and of course, by a large extent, the European ones. Otherwise, I would not be here presenting today. And it has allowed us to grow and expand. As I say now, we, not just we, as a small, I still consider us a small company, but the truth is the workload that we have often overwhelms what we could produce locally. So it has forced us now to expand beyond our production capacity, beyond our shores. Again, another function of being in the digital economy, right? The lines of export gets blurred because then you need to build capacity and support, and not export product, but export supply systems so that you can serve better. And for us, those exist in Colombia, Mexico, just recently with a small studio in India, Brazil, and hope I'm not forgetting anybody else, Jamaica as well, and St. Lucia. So we have to curate those so that we can continue to meet scale as we need to in this business. But that's all driven in large part, as I said, by the European connections that we built out of this. This is just, I wanted to show this because this is an example of, at that time, MSI was Clive Oaks, who really worked closely with us in, again, you know, identifying studios, following up with them, you know what I mean, finding meaningful touch points. I think the benefit of the consultant, and for us at that time was Clive, is that a lot of times when you have people not involved in the company, they're a step back, so they can see connections that you may not necessarily see. And in the case with Clive and I, there were a lot of perspectives that I think intersected in a good way. A lot of times I would say, "Ah, why are we meeting with these people?" But he was able to identify synergies that I did not immediately identify. And of course, that led to us forming meaningful relationships. What's interesting here, this is actually our sheet that Clive and I went through. I brought this up because this was just for the Dutch market. So we would sit and, we would figure out, what is the best strategy, which is more relevant and whatnot. And these 5 came up to the top. So it's weird because I only pulled this up this morning after, how long was that? Maybe 5, 6 years ago. And I look at it and Submarine is there and the key is there. So they're our top 5. At the time, we had no relationship with them, and they're the 2 that have sustained us. So it's just interesting that from planning to execution, and then beyond execution to look back and see sort of where it all began. A couple of key takeaways from our point of view, and this is, well, I mean, it is facts, but is our facts. I mean, but everybody has their own experience. The first thing that I always find important to remind myself, first of all, and of course others in similar position, is that export potential is not a function of size. I mean, in size of your company as a SME. And that is especially so in the creative industries, for fashion, the ones that I mentioned, animation, music, etc. It is not a function of size. A lot of times we conceive export potential as something for bigger companies to do and not small companies to do, but that in fact is not the case, and that is not the case. I mean, it could be the case, but that is in no way, I think, a restriction. I think what's important to take away from the whole relationship between export potential and how people are associated with bigger companies is a lot of those systems, a lot of those professional elements that bigger companies would do, smaller companies usually don't have this mind space to, need to be done. You know what I mean? In terms of your presentation, in terms of your professionalism, in terms of your focus on sales and marketing, really that's where it is. But a lot of times in my experience, yeah, I mean, you shouldn't consider export potential a function of the size of your company until you're on the conditions you figure out how you serve it. But as I say now, there are so many components to serving clientele, like with us, you know what I mean? It's funny, right? Because we are still 9 people that I consider our people from day one, but I mean, we just came through a period there. I was looking at everything and we had 62 animators working, pushing out our product in 4 territories, in 4 countries, right? And now it's flipped, right? Because when you form these relationships, some of the companies that I showed you before, now they work for us. You know what I mean? So we have, depending on the project, there may be specific quality in storyboarding or design done in Spain. I mean, and now we turn it around and we would engage some of those people to the inputs in our product that then we export to other European territories. The mission itself is only step 1. I mean, it's really not a rock back and, wait till the pizza come out the oven. That's one step of many steps. The results are not automatic. These relationships take a long time to curate, and I mean, it involves a lot of follow-up. So I think that's important. I mean, if you expect that right after your exports will just shoot to the ceiling, well, that would be good news. Yeah. The third one, I think for me, it was a it was one of those things that I had taken for granted, that we present a big cultural proposition. So a lot of times we approach these markets, and this, I think, applies not just to creative, any type of company. And we see ourselves as producers of chocolate. We see ourselves as producers of animation, music, IT services, soap. But when we get to those markets, they do not see us as same, just by way of where we come from, how we talk, just the how to say, what's the word, the fantasy or the spectacle of how we look. not that is unique, but just that a lot of times people just have not seen how people from Toronto, they go, look, you know what I mean? Not going to build the same. Those things I think drive or they interact with the emotional, they give people an emotional feeling. So when they're listening to your presentation or they're trying to understand your product, it's not so much that you just sell and make great soap, right? I mean, they really receive it in the context of who you are, who we are, and where we come from, and why soap. And I find this important because I learned this after the fact, and this came back to me, right? I mean, a lot of the relationships that I have is not because we're great at animation. I mean, we are good at animation, but if I'm being completely honest, there are many other people around the world just as good, right? But it's really a big cultural proposition. It's who we are. It's just that anything that provokes people emotionally, raise their curiosity, they just want to have those relationships. And in this case, is in the context of business, which is good. So always keep that in mind, that even as you're presenting, that is how people are perceiving, that's how they're looking. And you don't have to sell it, you know what I mean? They receive it, you know what I mean? Sometimes I think for us in the beginning, not anymore, but we felt the urge to highlight how Trinidadian or how cultural or how Caribbean our product or services are. And we really don't need to do it. I mean, it's like talking about accent deliberately when you already have accent, right? But we just don't appreciate it from their POV. So now, I mean, I don't do any of that. I would just still present the products and the services that we do and the relationships. But I'm always aware that it comes with a big cultural proposition that they're receiving. You know what I mean? And that, of course, adds another layer of authenticity, and it's good for relationships. So be aware of that when having the discussions. And it was interesting to hear Hannah's presentation where she spoke about what is meaningful for the different cultures and different people in different territory, like the Swedes, and how they approach, how they appreciate people that are humble, and they're not too concerned about it's frowned upon to be selling yourself and speaking highly about yourself. When really marketing is really about talking about yourself, but how you approach it is very, very important. And that's something to be aware of. I thought that was a good point that Hannah made, and you have to take that into consideration in the presentation, whether it be hard or soft. The third one I sort of mentioned, you only get out what you put in to it, and not what is given to you by MSI and Export TT, despite the incredible value of that work that is done. Really, it was really my teams then taking that and then pushing it, curating it, and really forming meaningful relationships that came out of it. Human connections and cultural connections are critical. I mean, it sort of spoke to what I mentioned earlier, but really a lot of the relationships that you will form in Europe, because we're so unique, we're so small, and we're so distant from those economies and cultures, it really is a human connection that is what will get you over the line, and then you could perform. Then you have to perform, but I mean, you're only in this as a tier 1 or tier 2 because you already perform. But it's important for you to acknowledge and be aware of the cultural and human connections. And those are just, you know what I mean? I'm a 40-year-old male who loves football. You're a 14-year-old male that loves football. You know what I mean? I went there in the Dutch market when we went on FIT4Europe. We went to AZ Alkmaar game. I never seen AZ Alkmaar at that time, but it's a very non-business thing that, of course, made the business relationship so much more meaningful. I ain't saying go to a AZ Alkmaar game, but you understand what I'm saying. The human connections is really what will stick beyond the competence of the business and the product that you sell. So I would say be always aware of that. The next point I think is super critical is to be culturally sensitive in advance. to the unique regional differences. I mean, Europe has a rich history, and no doubt Sweden, and as many of you all know, Germany as well has a very rich history. So I would say the single most important pre-market work is know, research, understand the cultural sensitivities, the very regional differences within countries. Hannah had showed, for Germany example, the different territories, and all of them are very, very different culturally, historically. And if you're not aware of those, it could be very awkward moments that you may not be aware of. So sometimes you don't form business relationship, and it has nothing to do with how good your product were, but you may not be aware, for example, of the difference between the Flanders part of Belgium versus the Dutch part of the French part of Belgium. Similarly, you know, as all of us know, Germany also has a very rich and a very complex history that you need to be sensitive of, because, you know, the smallest comment that, you know, could be inappropriate and you could be none the wiser. And I have found Europeans more so than Americans, you know, they're very aware. You know, they are sensitive in the opposite, so they're always sensitive in how they communicate. And I think passively they sort of accept, they expect the same. So there's so many. So anytime you are looking at a market or a company, I think it's important to understand the region that that company may be operating and the people behind it. I mean, that I think is the most important thing, you know what I mean? Because in what you may think may be points in which you're trying to connect, I mean, you can say something or share sentiment that they receive very quietly and respectfully as insensitive or hurtful or insulting. So I would say that it's super important to be aware of that in advance. Curation of meaningful businesses relationship takes time. It is now how many years? 6 years after, and we still work at it. I would say, you know, as I showed you on this list before, I mean, everything is a filter, right? So you go wide and then you really focus on a few meaningful relationships rather than just try to canvas everybody with the same proposal before the market. Always be aware of competitors, especially in certain areas where you do business in countries like Sweden that may be a smaller market. You know, I mean, you can't form a meaningful relationship with two direct competitors immediately. It becomes awkward. And I would say, you know what I mean, once you have those initial reach outs, you know, pick one and then go on, and if that doesn't work out, good. So those are things that I think are important in these first time meetings. The next one from people take for granted: growth potential is always exponential. I don't care what anybody say it is, you know what I mean? If you meet with one company and form a meaningful business relationship, just that one will grow to 9, 10. You know what I mean? It is never linear. It never decreases once you continue to work at it. So you may schedule 20 meetings and you may find that you only had 2 meaningful ones or 3 meaningful ones, and you only did business with 1. But over time, that growth will be exponential, no doubt. As you become known in the market, people start to be aware of what you've done. You know what I mean? And you become, it's a sort of passive market awareness. The weird thing about Full Circle that I am working on is, I remember a few years ago, we were trying to form a relationship with a company here now, who we now have a relationship with, incidentally, that is our Rotoplastics. And Rotoplastics was in El Socorro extension, and we were in, at that time, Trent City, I believe, and they were completely unaware of us and what we did and what we offered. I felt like we were so close, yet there was we received a call, you know, sometime around that time from a company in France. There was a market going on in France at the time, and we were recommended by a company in Belgium. And we were not even there, you know, we weren't even present in that market. So it's just weird how, you know, I mean, those relationships form even when you're not there and I just find a way. Engage with institutions and support agencies. This is something that SMEs really don't like to do before. I think it's so aware, it's so important to be aware of all the restrictions and the incentives, the things that make trade easier and harder within Europe, within certain subcategories in Europe. Some things are harder to do, and some things are easier to do with respect to trade and business and export. So it's important that you are aware of that. And it's very hard. The institution and the support agencies, that's what they're there for. And I think it's important to know that